So again, welcome. I don't know, Dawn, if you have any housekeeping you'd like to discuss before we get going, but if you'd
Oh,
like to.
I appreciate that, Joni. Just probably one thing. We have a fidelity reviewer training coming up on the 20th and 23rd. So if anybody's interested in attending that and they haven't gotten the link for registration yet, give me a holler and I'll get it sent to you.
Great, thank
Or I
you.
might put it in the chat. Darren's the
Perfect.
king of doing that. I'll see if I can.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
why don't we get started? Just to remind everyone that today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. We want it to be interactive, so we'll encourage you to ask questions and participate throughout the session, whether that's through chat or unmuting your mic, raising your hand, whatever works best. So we will move forward. And then a note about artificial intelligence. We do want to just make it clear that the use of any automated note-taking bots or similar tools during these events or meetings requires prior approval. Any unauthorized use of such tools is prohibited to ensure the privacy and confidentiality of all attendees. Um, Also, any recording that is created through AI is not recognized as an official recording of this session, and we do reserve the right to exit trainees from the training if they are using AI to take notes or record the session without prior approval. So just a little disclaimer there. And speaking of materials, um, materials and recordings are no longer emailed to participants. I will upload the presentation materials here in the chat about halfway through, maybe towards the end of the session, just to make sure everyone has a chance to take that with them. And then also the recording of today's session is available on the HCA FCS channel, which is listed here, approximately 2 weeks after the session. So check back on the Foundational Community Supports YouTube channel, and you'll be able to access the recording of today's session. So our topic today is offering feedback, a constructive feedback to job seekers in a positive way using a strengths-based approach. A lot of times providing feedback can be a challenging skill to master, whether we're offering constructive feedback to job seekers about their job seeking skills or such as interviewing, or addressing concerns about work performance. It's never an easy task in our role as job coaches and employment specialists. And this webinar is focusing on identifying and practicing different ways to provide feedback in a positive and strengths-based manner. So we usually get started with talking about a success that someone may have had over the past month or two, something that you're particularly proud of or feel was a win in terms of your employment services or job development, whatever kind of you feel was successful and you want to share with others. And we also have a little bit of a conversation about what contributed to that success. What do you think helped that be successful for you? And it does oftentimes help others on the call to kind of get a sense of, what other colleagues are doing and some of the things that are um, helpful and useful for others. So does anyone have a success they'd like to talk about, whether it's related to someone getting a job or breaking through to an employer that maybe you've been trying to develop a relationship with? Any success, you can use the chat or unmute your mic. Part of our learning community is learning from each other and having these discussions periodically around successes and challenges kind of helps us build that camaraderie among each other and kind of learning from what has worked and what challenges other people might be facing.
I'll go. I'm trying to, oh, there I am. I was trying to get off of camera or turn my camera on.
Oh, there
So,
you are. Hi, Melody. Thank you.
hi. So I am Melody Partial,
And
and
before we, because it is being recorded, just make sure we're not disclosing any identifying information about folks. I know probably all know that, but just want to make sure that's clear. But thank you, Melody, for volunteering.
you're welcome. So a win for me is that about a year and a half ago, I started working for myself, and I recently got a contract with a organization here that's in partnership with the healthcare authority, where I will have the privilege of training and supporting other folks that are supporting people in finding housing and in getting back into the community. And I am here today because I wanted to know the best, some of the best ways to do that, the best ways to have conversations if somebody could be more successful by trying something different. And I'm super excited. Yeah.
Great, welcome and congratulations. What a great
Thank
win.
you.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have a success or a win? Let me see here in the chat. Um, Ian is asking, how do you define success? Is it a measurable metric or an abstract outcome like work-life balance, and client satisfaction retention? Yes, it could be any of those. I probably would be less inclined to measure it as a metric and think of it more as an abstract outcome, like um, you know, something that you feel particularly satisfied with or successful with. So think about a success, and Ian, if you want to pop something in the chat or unmute, that would be great. Um, we can move on to maybe some challenges that people have faced over the last month or two, or areas that have been obstacles for you related to the job, whether it's getting in touch with those businesses, having a hard time building relationships with employers, or maybe you're going through a period where um, people you're working with are not connecting with jobs, or the job matching hasn't been as great as you would hope it to be. Any challenge that you might be facing. Scott, I see yep, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm having a big challenge right now with a particular client who, when it comes to consistent communication, um, every appointment and scheduled phone call that I've had with this person, they have either missed, forgotten, or asked to reschedule. And I had an interview scheduled for them this afternoon, and it was on a time and date that they scheduled for themselves last week. And this morning they texted to say that they want to cancel that interview because they just don't really feel like attending. And that's really frustrating.
Yeah, it sounds frustrating. It sounds like you're doing a lot of work and it's not easy. I've done job development, and getting employers to agree to an interview is a big win. So I think that's a win. I think that's a success, Scott. How are others feeling about what Scott said? Is it something that others here on the call can relate to?
Yeah,
No matter, yeah, Melody.
definitely. Yeah, I worked one-to-one for about 7 years with people, and it's super hard to continue to be motivated to support them.
Mhm.
And it's hard to not judge. Um, yeah. Usually there's something underlying that's the issue. It's a matter of figuring out what that is, right?
Yeah. It could be something related to the person's belief that work is possible for them or would be positive, maybe exploring their concerns about possibly losing benefits. Maybe that's a concern that they have that maybe they're not articulating. Maybe they're concerned about losing friendships if they return to work, or maybe there are other um, areas that's creating this ambivalence.
I would
I know,
say,
go
uh,
ahead.
for me, when I quite a few years ago, I live with a major depressive disorder, and I just had a hard time doing anything. And so, yeah, and then when I got to a point where I could get into the field, then I was not confident in my own skills and my worth. So that led me to drag my feet a little.
Hmm. Yeah. Those beliefs people might have, that internal stigma or that self stigma that people tend to believe the labels that maybe they've been told throughout these years. Scott, I know last month we talked a little bit about motivational interviewing. Next month, we're going to be addressing motivational interviewing again and using some techniques and a decisional balance, helping someone look at the pros and cons of work, helping them really dig at, what are the benefits of returning to work? What are the benefits of not working? What are the cons? What are the kind of negative parts about working, and what are the negative parts about not working, and helping them really look at that decision and kind of talking through what some of that is. And you might find that they might have certain fears or beliefs about their ability that maybe doing some sort of decisional balance or discussion could be helpful. But yes, next month we are going to be looking at using specific MI techniques of ORs, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries around employment and education planning. So please join us next month for that. So why don't we move into today's topic? Thank you everyone for sharing. It's helpful for Dawn and I and Darren to get a sense of where people might be struggling or where the successes are so that we can identify useful and relevant topics for future months. So we're going to talk about what constructive feedback is. We're also going to identify the context where feedback is provided to job seekers or employees, and then also talk about different strategies to provide constructive feedback in a positive and strengths-based way. Let me just peek here in the chat real quick. Yeah, Melody, here's Scott's frustration. So let's think about a time when you were given feedback in maybe a not so positive way, in a negative way. How did you feel? So think about a time in your life, whether it's recent or maybe digging back into when you were in school or other jobs or whatever that might have been. But think about a time when you were given feedback in a way that was negative, and how did you feel about that? And if someone is willing to share or open up about that, that would be great. If not, you can kind of keep that to yourself, um, to sort of frame our discussion of how, you know, receiving feedback and providing feedback is very universal. We've all maybe had instances where we've gotten feedback from maybe bosses or teachers or whoever it might be, in a negative way. And then think about a time when you were given feedback in a positive way and how you felt about that. Would anyone like to talk about either of these? Certainly don't have to, but if you would like to share?
I could share.
Thank you,
Um,
Steve.
I feel like, especially when it comes to receiving negative feedback in the past, especially when I was younger, it's not uncommon to have that sort of instinctual defensiveness of
Mm,
just like, obviously, I'm not doing anything wrong. They're just getting the wrong idea. And
yes,
so it's that instinctive, like, especially when you're younger, dignity is all you have.
yes.
And it's just,
Yeah, you
it's
feel
a,
like you have to be on the defensive. You have to defend your actions or defend what what they're saying, particularly if the feedback is done in a negative way. You know,
yeah.
you might tend to shut down, you might tend to not really feel particularly close to that person anymore, or feel like you just stopped listening or really caring what that person has to say. And then the
It can,
opposite, yep, go ahead.
oh, sorry, it could almost feel like a fight or flight survival thing, almost like you're in almost like danger, as irrational as that is.
Yes, yes. Someone's coming at you, kind of telling you something negative. And what about a time, anyone, when you were given feedback in a positive way? What did that feel like?
I can share a positive experience.
Thank you, Alexa.
Yeah, just yesterday I was at the dentist, and this is very specific, but they were giving me very positive feedback about the care that I take on my teeth and explaining how there's just general upkeep that needs to happen, and like tartar buildup just happens, and instead of like vilifying me for having natural human things, they kind of explained why it happens and how I can kind of mitigate it and stuff. And it just really made me feel like I was able to actually make a difference in my own health.
I love that example. That's a great example. You didn't feel like they were being critical in a way that, they were shaming you for whatever was happening, but they were, highlighting the things that you were doing well, the good things that were happening. And did it make you feel like you want to take better care of your teeth?
Yeah, it did
Yeah,
actually.
continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
they were like, we have a really high fluoride toothpaste if you're interested. I think it might help. And I was like, I'll take it. So they made a sale kind of thing as well.
Yeah,
So it
yes.
benefited everybody.
That's a great example. So it feels good when we're given feedback in a way that's positive and strengths based. So kind of keep that frame in mind. Let's just look at this on the yeah, I think you're right, Ian. It seems like both positive and negative experiences touch on the need to feel seen and validated. Even negative feedback is engaged dialogue. Absolutely. Although Alexa highlights that the positive feedback made her feel like she was doing something right and she wanted to continue along, that path of good oral hygiene or whatever that might be. Kind of excited to, keep that momentum going. Melody?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something off of what Alexa was talking about. It prompted me to think about when I took my cat to the vet.
Yeah.
And so I am almost 60 years old. I grew up in a small town of Montana. We did not take or we did not brush our animals' teeth. That was not a thing back
Mhm.
then. And last couple of times I've gone to this new vet, she'll say to me, "Wow, he's got a lot of tartar on his teeth."
Mhm.
And yet she doesn't give me any directive or say, you know, would you like to know how to brush his teeth, or would you
Mhm.
like to know how to offer care? And, so it just leaves me feeling a little, I mean, I know now that people do brush their animals' teeth because there's the internet and Facebook
Right.
but yeah, I think it's good too if you are going to make a criticism that you also give some feedback on how it could go better.
Yes, I think that's a great example too. And you touched on what we're going to talk about a little bit more when we talk about strategies, not just giving that feedback or criticism in a vacuum, but offering some specific suggestions on how someone can improve. Yes, I agree, Ian. Excellent point. So let's move into um, a little bit of a discussion about what are some of the outcomes when feedback is delivered positively versus negatively. Um, One, just similar to some of the examples you just provided, for job coaches or employment specialists, employment consultants here on the call, providing constructive feedback effectively is a really important skill that does underpin and contribute to successful relationships. Thoughtful feedback helps the individual, the person, the job seeker strengthen their skills, boost confidence. It may also enhance a readiness for employment. And I don't mean readiness in terms of someone's able to, have clothing or get there on time. I mean readiness in the sense of believing that work is something that would be possible and positive to them. Um, it also encourages the person's reflection on job performance and may promote goal setting and steady progress towards career success. And when it's offered in a respectful and supportive manner, feedback can really um, inspire motivation, maybe help resolve some ambivalence, and certainly encourage growth. Conversely, in a negative manner, feedback can lead to frustration. The person can feel, their feelings can get hurt. It might harm the relationship. Um, we really strive in our roles to build up relationships, to create a trusting relationship, because there may be times when we have to address areas that the person may feel a certain way about it, but having an opportunity to provide feedback in a very positive, strengths-based way helps to eliminate barriers to further communication. So constructive feedback, the purpose of giving feedback is really to support a person's learning and growth and skill development. In ways that benefit both them and others, right? It certainly we don't want it to be used in a way to find fault or express disapproval. I think in your examples you identified those. When people experience criticism, which those finding fault or expressing disapproval, that's more of that criticism. When people experience this type of criticism instead of constructive feedback, they may feel discouraged, um, not valued very much. Um, so constructive feedback is useful to provide specific and actionable um, suggestions, and it promotes a positive relationship. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with the person and discuss together some different strategies. So we're going to talk about that. Any thoughts on what constructive feedback is? Kind of this definition that it's outlining a concern. It's very specific so that the person knows, to Melody's point, you need to know what specifically they're suggesting, so that you can identify a strategy to help resolve an area of concern. So feedback can also be looked at as sort of motivational type of feedback, reinforcing what the job seeker is doing well, or the supported employee or the employee is doing well, and encourages that person to build on those strengths. It could help boost confidence, reinforces positive behaviors, and motivates effort for continued improvement. It could also be in terms of more developmental, and it provides suggestions and maybe some guidance to help job seekers grow and improve their skills or refine their skills. It focuses on identifying areas for improvement and maybe suggesting alternate approaches or strategies that can enhance performance and success on the job. So thinking about constructive feedback in employment services or housing services, we're really talking today more about employment. Under what circumstances might you offer feedback to job seekers? What's the context? What are the times that you might be in a position where you're offering feedback, constructive feedback to job seekers or people who are currently working?
I really love Scott's
Hmm.
mention in the chat to notice
Yes.
desired behavior. Yeah. When we
Yeah.
think of
No. Yep.
when we think of construction or constructive feedback, we all often think of it in a negative way, but
Hmm.
yeah, that's fantastic.
I think that kind of goes in that first category, right? Like
Hmm.
noticing, Scott mentioned in the chat, I love this too, Melody, noticing a desired behavior and providing immediate positive reinforcement to encourage it. What would be an example of that, Scott or others? What would be a time where you can notice a what would that positive behavior look like in your roles?
In one particular instance, this is uh, the same client I was mentioning earlier, but we had another interview a few weeks back, and this client initially did not want to attend to it. They were asking to reschedule it. They said that they weren't going to be able to make it, but they ultimately did. They managed to make it on time. It went great, and I was immediately, the minute that I saw them in the door of the lobby, I was like, I am so glad you made it. Oh, you're
Yes,
right on time. Fantastic.
yes,
Don't even worry about it. Don't worry about running late. You're here. That's great.
yes, absolutely. And the interview hadn't even gone well at that point. So you're already providing reinforcement and positive and recognizing a strength that the person is there. I'm sure that probably contributed to that person's success on the interview. They've already gotten a win. Right when they walked in the door, you recognized it. And it could have gone very differently, right? It could have been, even just a glance down at your watch or anything that could have
Yeah.
suggested some level of disapproval, right? That they were maybe a little bit late, but you didn't. You highlighted the strength that that person was there. That's an excellent example. Any other circumstances that you can think of that you might offer job seekers or employees that you're working with constructive feedback? So Scott mentioned the interview, the application process. What about times when, if you have a relationship with the employer and you have, permission to interact with the employer and you're doing some level of job coaching and that employer says something about the person's performance to you. Is that something that happens in your worlds? Has that happened? where maybe an employer has reached out to you to talk about maybe performance issues that the person might be having on the job?
I have a very unique client that I work with where he works remotely for 2 hours a week for a company doing like data entry and such. And we get a lot of feedback from the employer about his work because the thing that we're working on the most is attention to detail. And I always approach the conversations about making those edits, especially after we hear from the employer about something, I approach it as are your accommodations working for you? Are there
Yes.
things that we need to adjust? Sometimes he has two tasks that he does. He usually splits them up between days. Sometimes he does them on the same day, and that usually causes issues. So I remind him to, split up your time,
Mhm.
take your time. I know sometimes the schedule doesn't allow for it, but leaning back on the accommodations that are already in place and then possibly suggesting other things. He's not super in need of more accommodations. It's just reminding him to use the ones that he has. So definitely instead of highlighting the issues, just be like, okay, for next time, this is what we're gonna do.
Mhm.
Make sure that we're using our resources and go through it that way.
Do the resources need to be adjusted? Do the supports need to be adjusted? Do we need to do a better job collectively identifying if that accommodation is continuing to be useful? Absolutely. Let's see, we have something here in the chat. Yes, Ian mentions, I love that strategy. Alexa, checking it up on foundational support. Absolutely.
Um, it's okay. I feel like I'm sharing a lot, but I have a example that I feel like connects to that situation you're talking about of when
Hmm.
an employer sort of reaches out to you about maybe performance concerns with a
Hmm.
client you support. Um, Recently, I have a client who's extremely motivated to do by their job. They love their work. They're extremely well supported by their staff, but there have been a few recent just social concerns that they were receiving feedback on that the employer would like my help with facilitating that conversation, providing that constructive feedback of things
Hmm.
that was kind of like undesired behaviors. Um, and so I was trying to be clear and direct and like making it clear that there is like behaviors that they would like to change and maybe improve, but providing it in as positive way to build them up as possible. So it kind of was like sandwiching it between like a positive of like,
Yes.
I was talking with your manager, and he was saying that you have been doing such a good job about this and this and this,
Hmm.
and that's great. You've been showing tremendous growth on that. He also noticed that there's one thing here that still he was concerned about. And maybe we can think about ways we can fix that because he was also telling me that he was really impressed when he was seeing you do such and such like desired behavior that kind of connects to that. Like instead of doing that, maybe we could
Hmm.
focus on this thing because he was really impressed when he saw you doing that earlier. And that could really make you a strong teammate. And
Yes,
just
so kind
really
of building up those strengths, really using the strengths as the guide. I love that. And I think when we talk about some of the different strategies, you'll see that that is really one of those strategies that really helps when you're conveying constructive is really focusing on those strengths. So here's a little bit of a kind of framework about offering constructive feedback, and you'll notice that many of what Scott and others have mentioned are kind of on this list. You know, we do a lot of texting and emails a lot. Sometimes offering constructive feedback is best done in person, or at the very least, maybe like a Zoom where you can see the person and they can see you. Um, email or other like non face-to-face ways like texting, it's hard to really convey tone or other body language. And you know, when we're communicating with others, we oftentimes follow along with our eyes. We show empathy with our body language. And offering this type of constructive feedback is best done in person or again remotely where you can see the person. Um, we also want to consider your own feelings. You know, you might have some emotional connection about this. You may want to practice beforehand to ensure that maybe you're calm about it and feel confident providing this feedback. So maybe use your colleagues or supervisor. Make sure that, you know, your emotions are kind of in check a little bit so that you're able to convey this in a way. You might feel a certain way about the employer's feedback, and you certainly don't want that to be conveyed to the person that you're working with. So kind of recognize that you may have feelings around this, and reach out to colleagues or examine those feelings. We also want to be empathic, right? We want to be genuine and concrete and give specific examples. Um, it might be something like Scott mentioned, sandwiching in a strength, but then kind of recognizing that there might be some areas of concern. So maybe a specific example might be, I've noticed that you were unsure how to respond to the interviewer when they asked about why you left your past job. Um, you know, you did a great job maintaining eye contact with the interviewer. But I did notice when we were, you know, when you were meeting and interviewing with the employer that you had a hard time responding or had some difficulties with your response of why you left your past job. Let's talk about some why that might be. And then you want to actively listen to why, you know, what the person's response is. You know, give the person a chance to respond. Another specific around employment might be your employer contacted me regarding you calling out of work at the last minute. Um, Give the person a chance to respond. So use your good active listening skills. Provide an opportunity to hear from the person, um, kind of their side and what was happening from their perspective, using your active listening and motivational interviewing skills. Let's see, I see a lot of things here in the chat. Okay, some people are getting pulled away. Scott mentioned, I've heard the saying that the way a conversation can unfold can largely be decided by the initial seconds of your tone and emotions. How to convey yourself can be so important. Yes. Um, Melody reinforces that. Absolutely. This is where we check our biases come in. Yes. And we want to have these conversations when we feel that we've checked our biases, that our emotions are intact. We want to offer concrete suggestions and tangible solutions for the person. We want to, you know, hear from them what maybe their suggestions are and actively listen and encourage the person to talk about what they might be finding, what they might think would be helpful. We want to provide achievable suggestions, and some guidance on how to put those into action. We also want to, as I mentioned, encourage the person, the job seeker, the employee to share their own ideas and strategies. But most important in this step is really to identify tangible suggestions on how to move forward. What guidance can we provide to help the person put that into action? And then finally, we want to offer our help. Alexa described this very nicely when she said, we want to support the change, right? We want to identify ways that we can support the change that the person is making. Empower the person to put those agreed upon solutions into practice. Maybe you set a timeline or a schedule, or follow-up meeting to review progress on implementing and putting those suggestions and solutions into practice. Show the person that your support extends just beyond this conversation. Let the person know that you're available for ongoing guidance. You're available to help the person really put these changes into practice.
Well, and also to let people know that it's not them as a person, it's an experience. So like
Yes.
it's a one-time thing. You're not a bad interviewer. You just had
Hmm.
an issue this time, or you were off task this time, but you're not, that's not you as a person. I think sometimes when we get feedback, it's like almost like you're a terrible worker or whatever. And
Yes.
no, you just had a bad day. I mean, or something like that. So,
Absolutely, Sarah. I think you hit the nail on the head where your feedback should always relate to a current example or a current situation or a current problem. The person should not feel like this is their, overall, I'm like you mentioned, I'm a terrible interviewer. No, this specific interview in this moment, the response may have been better if so I absolutely try to make sure that that specific feedback is really related to a current situation so that the person does not feel um like generally speaking I'm the worst employee or I'm the worst interviewer. So really paying attention to how you're conveying that. Thank you for bringing that up and highlighting that. Any other thoughts before we move on? I just always like to make sure we're framing all of these discussions, all of these somewhat difficult, challenging discussions that we might have in this strengths-based way. And this is just sort of a couple of principles in psychiatric rehabilitation services. One of our core principles is a strengths-based approach. Rather than looking at the person's deficits or problems or difficulties, we really are coming at it, and Scott mentioned it, others mentioned on the call, ways that that's done, right? We really want to observe and identify what a strength is or what a skill the person has, and then maybe move into our discussion around constructive feedback. A lot of times, and it's described in papers and the literature in psychiatric rehabilitation, a lot of people who have a serious mental health condition may have a difficult time identifying their strengths and abilities. And that's due to many things. Services for many, many years focused on deficits and problems and weaknesses. Um, so we have to really be aware that oftentimes people that you're working with, interacting with, engaging with may not have always felt or have been able to focus on their strengths. So we might have to do that for them and highlight different strengths that that person may not be able to see. So here's just a little quick scenario I thought we'd walk through. And I have some questions. So as we're kind of walking through this scenario, think about, what are some of the key takeaways as we're walking through it? What did you notice about how the job coach provided their feedback? And what were some of the key takeaways? What were some of the strategies that maybe the job coach used that we just discussed or that you find helpful? So the situation is this person, Marcus, started working as a stock associate at a retail store. The current situation is their supervisor informed the job coach that while Marcus is friendly and dependable, they often spend too much time talking with coworkers during his shift, which slows down productivity. The supervisor wants to see improvement, but appreciates Marcus's positive attitude. So the job coach's approach is the job coach arranges a private meeting with Marcus after his shift to discuss the concern using constructive feedback techniques. And the feedback conversation goes as follows. The job coach, Marcus, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about how things are going at work. Your supervisor mentioned that you've been getting along really well with your coworkers, and that's great. Your friendliness is one of your strengths and really adds to the team environment. And Marcus says, thanks. I really like the people I work with. It makes the day go by faster. The job coach follows up with, that's good to hear. At the same time, your supervisor has noticed that conversations can sometimes run a bit long, making it harder to stay on schedule with some of the stocking tasks. I know you're capable of doing the work efficiently. You've shown that in your first few weeks. How do you think we could balance being social with staying on task? And then Marcus responds, yeah, I guess I do talk a lot. Maybe I can save conversations for break time. Then the job coach follows up with, that sounds like a great plan. You could also try setting small goals, like finishing a section of shelving before chatting. Let's check in next week to see how it's going. If you find it challenging, we can come up with more strategies together. So what were some key takeaways? What about this scenario did you notice what strategies or ways did the job coach really provide constructive feedback in a positive way? You can use the chat or unmute.
He was friendly with his coworkers and got along.
Yeah, so the job coach started with the positive, that they acknowledge that the supervisor recognizes the friendliness and getting along with team members, and he started out with that. Absolutely. Let's see here in the chat. Uh, my big takeaway was how the feedback was structured, positive criticism, actionable. And then someone else, Melody mentioned, it's wonderful that the job coach includes Marcus in the brainstorming around how to stay on task. Yes, Marcus was asked, what are your thoughts? What do you think? How do you think you could balance being social and staying on tasks? So getting feedback from him, they collaborated on solutions rather than the job coach just sort of imposing what they thought. Um, what else did the job coach do? Kind of here at the end.
Follow up.
Yes, yeah, they provided follow-up support to reinforce the success. They provided opportunities to continue to have the discussion and to come up with something that will work. Let's see here in the chat. The job coach opens up in a way that doesn't sound immediately ominous, talking about how things are going, yes, and starting with the positives. This conversation isn't scary. Yes, I think that's exactly right. So I'm gonna get your thoughts on putting it all together, and I'm gonna, as we're doing that, I'm gonna put in the chat the PowerPoint presentation so you all have that. But as we're kind of ending today, think of a time when the feedback you provided wasn't welcomed positively. What were the circumstances and outcome? And then based on what we talked about today and what colleagues here on the call have shared, what would you do differently? So let me put this in the chat. Also going to put the evaluation in the chat. You can unmute your mic or put right in the chat. So a time that maybe the feedback wasn't welcomed very positively. What were the circumstances and the outcome, and what would you do differently? There have definitely been times where I was not in the right emotional headspace for the conversation and that directed the outcome. I would have waited until I was in a more neutral headspace to remain positive and constructive. Yes, I agree, Scott. I was also going to say in my when I was providing more direct service, it was sometimes it would be done hectic and I didn't, consider walking into a more, private space and just kind of standing there, just making sure not only in a good headspace, but physical space, making sure that it's private and not so hectic and not, rushed. Um, so I would probably and had done things differently by making sure it was a more private and more calm space. Scott, yes, being mindful of location and privacy can also be an enormous factor. Yes. So think about that as we move into our summary. So we talked about some successes, whether it was job development or other successes around employment services. I appreciate the contributions of colleagues here on the call and talking about what some of their challenges and successes were. We talked about and defined constructive feedback, and we also talked about some of those strategies of how to provide constructive feedback in a positive and strengths-based way. And Melody in the chat is writing, it's also important to know the person and their learning style. My husband is neurodivergent and says that he thinks without realizing he may offend others. Yes, so maybe taking opportunities to practice how you're going to provide that constructive feedback. Use your colleagues or supervisor, or others. Some references, resources. Any questions that people might have before we head out? And I'll put my, no question, yes, thank you, Scott. I'll put my email address here in the chat as well. And please, if you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out. And then if you could kindly complete the survey, I did put the link in the chat, but you could also use the QR code. I'll leave it up for a minute or so. And hopefully I'll see everyone back in November, second week of November, same time, and we're going to review motivational interviewing and specifically OARS.
Thank you so much, Joni. Well done as always.
Thank you, Dawn. And I will advance here to the last slide. So if you'd like more information on becoming an FCS provider, please reach out to the number here, WellPoint, and keep an eye out for the Foundational Community Supports newsletter. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for all of your involvement, everyone.
Yes, I was going to say that too. I appreciate those that offered conversation. I love
Yes.
learning from my peers.
Yes, and that's a critical piece of what this learning community is really using each other's experiences and learning to help each other grow in their positions. So thank you, everyone.